Victoria, could I ask you to start us off, perhaps spend a few minutes just talking about the work of the foundation and the areas you've been particularly active in?
Of course, thank you for that intro, and morning everybody. Lovely to see so many faces. I'm sorry it's virtual, but I'm hoping it's not too much longer before we might actually be able to have a breakfast meeting where we eat breakfast in the same room at the same time, even if it's outside. As Hugh said, I joined the foundation just before the pandemic, so the plans I had when I started are not the plans that I've implemented over the past year, but it's been, you know, I'm sure it has for all of you, a complete roller coaster of a year. So I just wanted to say thank you for giving your time this morning to listen to us talk about some of the issues that our community has been facing and how we've addressed them, and also how businesses can be part of that. And it's great to have both Hugh and David from LMAX particularly on the call, because it is no exaggeration to say that as a foundation we would not have achieved what we have over the past 12 months without the support of their organisations. And I'm going to talk a bit about our work, and then at the end I'm going to talk about 4 different ways that companies can get involved in the community. And that's companies of all shapes and sizes. You don't have to be, you know, huge and have lots and lots of resources. There's something for everybody. So I just wanted to talk about a bit about our priorities before the pandemic. So the social issues that we'd identified in our borough, in our community, that we were prioritising were specifically isolation and loneliness, and particularly the mental health impact of that, opportunities for children and young people, and skills and employment. And as you can imagine, I'm sure I don't need to say, all 3 of those issues have really been exacerbated by the pandemic. We've seen obviously people not able to leave their houses, people who were already very lonely and isolated, now having to shield and not leave their houses, and the mental health implications of that over the long term. We've really seen, Hugh mentioned that our borough has the largest income inequality in the whole of London, and that's been further exacerbated. And we've particularly seen that gap between rich and poor play out amongst children in terms of their resources and their access to internet for home learning. But on the positive side, we have been able to make a difference over the past year. We've been there for our community in its hour of need. So we were able to, this time last year, launch a COVID-19 fundraising appeal. And that raised £850,000 in a really short space of time. And we could really quickly deploy that to over 50 frontline projects that were providing emergency response all across the borough. And we also realised, you know, from discussion with our partners, that Christmas was going to be a really tough time for people, particularly if they were isolated and lonely, or if they were in financial hardship. So we did another fundraising appeal, and we were able to reach 8,300 of some of our most vulnerable residents with our Christmas in a Box project. So there's been some kind of really bright spots and some really good work happening even through the darker times. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, we don't really know what's ahead of us still. It's time to kind of move from that emergency response into recovery. So we've kind of looked at how we can support what are now the changing needs of the community, because the stats before the pandemic, as Hugh said, were already very shocking, and we're pretty sure all of them have got worse. So we know, and many of you will know, for example, that Kensington and Chelsea has a much higher than average number of residents employed in hospitality, which has taken a huge hit over the pandemic. And we know that 1 in 5 adults who were employed in K&C before the pandemic are now either furloughed or have lost their jobs altogether. And the impact of that has meant that at the moment we've got double the number of residents claiming universal credit than there was this time last year. So we know there's going to be a lot of call for our skills and employment work, and we're going to need to invest a lot in that area. But we also know that our children and young people have had a really tough time. I mentioned the issue about resources and falling behind with academic studies. And there's other issues as well. So a lot of young people have found it a very stressful and anxious time. Just the whole idea of the coronavirus and a global pandemic has really caused them a lot of anxiety and made them feel really overwhelmed. And there's also been an issue with young people feeling very isolated from their friendship groups and very lonely and really craving some kind of social interaction. So we started trying to address some of that last year with our COVID-19 appeal. And then at the beginning of this year, with the support of Cadogan and a number of others, we were able to provide 115 laptops to 9 youth organisations around the borough. And the purpose of that was we'd identified some young people for whom home was not a safe place to learn. There was no point giving them a laptop and sending them home with it, because it just, it wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds in the house, or even if it had, there was no safe, quiet space for them to learn. So with the resources we gave them, the youth clubs were then able to invite those children to come in from January and start learning in a safe space with supervised, trusted adults. And those resources are now in place for the rest of the recovery. So the schools went back to school, was the primaries this week, and secondary is starting to go back. But there's going to be a lot of support work needed, and those resources are there for the long term.